All right, the last head coaching candidate that I want to talk about here is Aaron Glenn, who has been the defensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions since 2021. So over the last 4 seasons here, and I think he's done a really good job, as that entire team has done, of really elevating itself and getting to a Super Bowl caliber ceiling. I know they're not getting to it this year as they were defeated by the Washington Commanders. I think there are a lot of reasons that go into that. But Aaron Glenn, he's a fun candidate to have, Ollie, because he's 52 years old. He's got an extensive player background. He was drafted in the first round of the 1994 NFL Draft, pick number 12 to the New York Jets. New York Jets are a team that's looking for a head coach that he is linked with, so there's that connection there. He also played for the Houston Texans, the Dallas Cowboys, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and ended his career with the New Orleans Saints as a player, which is another head coaching opening that he has been linked to. He started his career in Cleveland as an assistant defensive backs coach because he himself was a great defensive back, was a 3-time All-Pro player during his NFL career. Then he was the defensive backs coach for the New Orleans Saints from 2016 to 2020, so he was there for a long time before he became the defensive coordinator for the Lions. So it's funny because the Saints and the Jets feel like those are the two organizations that are sort of vying for Aaron Glenn to be their next head coach potentially. The Jets have hey, you played for us some of your best playing days. You went to multiple Pro Bowls here with us as a player. And the New Orleans Saints say, hey, you've already been in the building here as a head coach or as a position coach. Now potentially you get to be a head coach there. So he's got ties to both of these organizations. As a defensive guy, how have you watched Aaron Glenn elevate this defense for the Detroit Lions? Some of the things that we've been able to see really over the past 2 years specifically, and what this kind of a coach brings to the table to either one of these organizations that he's likely a finalist for.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, picking between those two jobs, it's like, good luck, Aaron. You've waited your whole life for this opportunity. You got to pick between one of these two. I mean, you're picking basically, do I want to work with Sauce Gardner as a former DB, a DB specialist? Sounds epic. What a great life. Or do I want to go to the cap hell in New Orleans because my friends live there? It's like, it's a difficult.
Well, when you put it that way, Ollie.
Yeah. Yeah, but the one with Sauce Gardner, we didn't tell you the owner's a bit loony. So, oh, great. Thank you very much. What a great menu of options. Can I interview with anyone else, please? Do I have to have played for them? I really just want Aaron Glenn to get a shot here because his name, since he was like first the DB guy, the Saints, everyone was always every offseason, this is the guy. Be prepared. This guy's coming. He's going to be really, really special. And that happens every single hiring cycle. Prepare yourself. It's like, he's 52. Can someone give this guy a crack? If he's as special as everyone's saying he is, I want to see it go. And I think he's really earned the shot with the Lions, taking them, as you mentioned, from where they were in EBA per play to where they've wound up being this season, and doing it this year with just guys falling over left, right, and center, bringing different guys in the building every single week. And it's funny because I went and pulled up when you said we were doing the show, we were talking about him. I went and pulled up the most recent playbook I have of his to see if there's kind of anything in there. You know the way these guys are, they write the little mantras and things like that. Is there anything in there that jumps out about Aaron Glenn that would make sense for the show? And it was on the second page of the playbook. It says, quote, solve your problem with aggression, which is an old Gary Gibb axiom from he was the DC when Glenn was with the Saints. It's kind of a thing that's gone around him, it's gone around Rex Ryan, but that kind of gives you the blueprint of how he views defensive football. Whatever the problem is, it doesn't say problems, it says problem. Whatever your individual problem is, use aggression to solve it. And you watch the Lions defense, maybe don't pull up the Commanders game from the weekend. Maybe not. But if you watch them play, not the best tackling in that game, everything they do is as physical as you could possibly do it in the modern game, right? The highest volume of bump and run coverage you will find anywhere. The highest amount of just pure man coverage, latch and trap and slam people from off the ball positions. Watching the linebackers pick up crosses and things cutting across the middle of the field, they crush people. Jack Campbell, whatever you think of him as a player, all-around player, crushes people like nobody's business. He solves every problem on the football field. This guy's quicker than me. It's a short post. It's a drag route. I'll just hit him. I'll solve it with aggression. So that is kind of the culture and environment he brings you defensively. And I do think personally there's some mild concerns, some slight flaws in the kind of what he does structurally that I think he could improve on. And maybe if he gets another voice alongside him as the DC rather than just bringing kind of staff with him from Detroit could really help crank this thing to the next level. But just generally all around, it's usually well drilled, well coached all the way around. It's just a tough one for him coming off that. To have your second interviews coming off that week is a pretty rough one. But then Dan Quinn got absolutely waxed in last year's postseason and now has taken a team as a head coach to the NFC title game. So I'm hoping owners aren't foolish enough to watch one game and make that evaluation.
Yeah, and I think, getting into more of the weeds of it, you have to look at all the injuries that the Detroit Lions suffered this year on the defense side of the ball, especially losing the best player that you have on your defense in Aiden Hutchinson early on in this season. And yet Detroit was still a top 5 team when it came to overall defensive grade and EPA per play allowed. That number has only gone up. I mean, I remember in the 2022 season when this team was really still retooling their roster, they were 31st in the NFL at EPA per play allowed on the defensive side of the football. And I remember people were like, okay, well, maybe Aaron Glenn's not good at this. And then the next year, they were right around the top 15 when it came to EPA per play. And then, of course, this year, they're in the top 10 and top 5 in certain categories in that regard. So they have only gotten better under his tutelage, which has been fun to watch. He is an aggressive coach. I mean, he was a man coverage style type of a corner. And you can see now this year, having the guys up front, having the guys in the secondary that they were allowed to get at the safety level, certainly at the cornerback level before those guys started to get hurt, that is how he wants to play. Through the first half of this season, where they were able to have most of those guys out there before a lot of them started going down with injury, they played more cover one than any team in the NFL. They let Kirby Joseph be a single high free safety. They let Brian Branch roam around the field and be an absolute menace. And they allowed their corners on the outside to play that man coverage type of a style. And by doing that, you are allowing these guys to play fast, play free, and just have their certain assignment. I'm not letting this wide receiver catch the football. That is your job. Brian Branch goes, where is the football? Okay, like that is his job. Kirby Joseph is, I'm going to roam around the middle of the field. Middle of the field is going to be closed. And they had the best safety grade of any team in the NFL with that combination of how those guys were deployed. So when you throw all of that together, the aggressive style in which he plays is something that is very alluring, I think, as a defensive coach going to be a head coach, because it shows you that like it's not just this kind of sit back style. He is going to, as you said, solve your problems with aggression. It's funny you mentioned sort of where you heard that quote first. I heard it from Don Brown, the defensive coordinator of Michigan. That was the first time that I heard that one, and I absolutely loved it. So it's just now a coaching mantra that has evolved and grown, that a lot of defensive coaches specifically go, there ain't no waiting around to this. Go, all right? We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out in practice. I need you to be going 100% at all times, and we'll get confident as the season goes on. So to Aaron Glenn's credit, there's talk of like, okay, well, do you really want to hire a defensive coach? Do you really want to hire a defensive specialist? And he did have a quote earlier this week, I believe it was, where he said, quote, if you're going to hire me, you're hiring a coach. I'm not a defensive coach. I'm going to talk to the offense just as much as I talk to the defense. I just happen to be coaching on the defensive side of the ball. I understand offense as well as a number of people. So this is another guy, though, with an extensive playing background going back from the mid-90s all the way through the mid-2010s. He's been a coach in this league since 2014. He's obviously been around a lot of very successful head coaches. I got to think that when you talk about that Rolodex that you can have to fill out a staff, Aaron Glenn's got it. I don't know who exactly would be his offensive coordinator. I don't know who exactly he would have as, under him as the DC and some of the position coaches and all that kinds of stuff. But I look at a situation like the New York Jets, and the Jets have also interviewed Chris Spielman, who is the Lions executive, for their general manager spot. So if you go, okay, well, we're going to get a guy that Aaron Glenn is familiar with as the GM, and now we're getting that head coach GM connection. Now we've got a deep Rolodex of coaches that we could go to throughout Aaron Glenn's playing career as well as his coaching career. That feels like an ideal situation. And you go back to the New Orleans days when a lot of people were going, this dude's going to get his shot to be a head coach at some point. You already know. That just probably tells you he's got the heart, he's got the mind, and he's just got the attitude of a future head coach to be able to inspire people, lead people, communicate with people. Because for as much as I love the idea of coordinators, I understand we talk about the top head coaching candidates as the top coordinators because it's really the only thing that we have to go off of. But in reality, the best head coaches in the NFL, often they're not the best schematic coaches. They're smart. They're wise. They understand situations. They're leaders of people. They know how to communicate. They know how to set up those cultures. And to me, even beyond the statistical success that I mentioned of what Aaron Glenn has done and how aggressive his defense is like to be and how he has adapted with guys being in and out of the lineup and the roster growing over the last couple of years, even independent of all of that, he seems like a coach that knows how to lead people. And especially for situations like New Orleans, like the New York Jets, that's what you need. You need somebody to be able to have that type of command of that head coaching headset.
Yeah, and this is bias. It's coming from a defensive coach, so I accept that. But I get into this argument all the time about how they just want to hire the offensive guy because then you won't lose him. You know, you got to hire an OC. If he's good, you'll lose him. It's like, how about we just worry about getting a good coach to begin with, right? There's been plenty of the OCs who flamed out time and time again. These two organizations, you're talking about the Saints and the Jets. Saints less so, more dysfunctional in the cap, right? Than actually losing games every season. But certainly for the Jets, like, could we just like maybe get a winning record again? Then we can worry about losing our OC after that. That'd be pretty nice to be in a playoff contention, be at least in the end of season, like in picture, whatever it's called, in the hunt at the end of the season graphic would be pretty nice for us. Woody would be happy with that. We can worry about losing the second OC 6-7 years down the line. Those guys are pretty good. And as you mentioned, I think he's going to have, in the coaching community, as I said, for years it's been, when you say who are the guys, they all go, oh, it's Aaron Glenn. So that means all those guys would be running for jobs. If they think he's that guy, they all want to be around him. And when you get the defensive guy, and if it's a cycle where, let's say, Monken and Cohen go and Ben Johnson goes and Aaron Glenn's the defensive guy, maybe there's a Flores or a Robert Saleh or someone else out there, then the guy looking for a sitting offensive coordinator to come in for him who can run one side of the building on his own. It's going to be this guy. It's going to have his pick of the litter. Who are the best, brightest minds out there? Call everyone. Who is the guy who wants to take the jump in 2 seasons to be a head coach? He can come and run one half of my building. Right? So that is, it actually can differentiate you in that first year when you're just trying to get that leap. I get the long-term consequence of it. You got to go hire 3, 4, 5 OCs at some point. You hit a dead end and you get a dud and you end up with Arthur Smith and you end up with, these people are Matt Canada. You do that for 2 seasons. That can be a problem down the line. But the first and most important thing is to go and get a good head coach, and the rest can eventually figure itself out. Even Peyton Manning played under Tony Dungy. Bill Belichick coached Tom Brady. Like, great defensive coaches. Mike Tomlin had Ben Roethlisberger. Great defensive coaches have coached some of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. The head coach of Lamar Jackson is John Harbaugh. He's not an offensive guru.
I remember, I think it was last year's head coaching cycle, when we heard whispers of, I cannot remember which team this was, if it was ever made public, but one of these teams that was interviewing these potential head coaches, if they were interviewing defensive head coaches, they were saying, okay, give me who you would hire as offensive coordinator this year, and then give me who you would hire next year after we lose him. Like, they wanted 2. They wanted you to go 2 deep. Not only tell me who your staff is, you got to give me a roster of offensive-minded head coaches after the OC gets poached. It's like, damn, where are we right now in the football world? So before we go, anything in particular about Glenn in either of those spots that you like? Obviously, you talked a little bit about Sauce Gardner, him getting to be sort of a prodigy of his, playing cornerback and getting his hands on Sauce Gardner to get to work with him, and how talented he has already been at the NFL. But either of those spots really more alluring to you when it comes to the connection of Aaron Glenn?
It's tricky just because I think the thing with Glenn is because of the volume of bump and run coverage, people get caught up with the corners. And I even mentioned Sauce, right? But when you look at what his defense have done when they've done it well, it's the safeties. When you go back to the teams they had in New Orleans together, when they were being their most kind of multiple and interesting and most successful, it was the safety tandem. With the Lions this year, they got the best safety tandem in football. Best safety tandem, just like your talent for what those roles are, true free, and then the wild card guy in like a long, long time, right? That we've had 2 guys that clean in those roles the best possible. So you got to go and find 2 great safeties. Even if you got Sauce Gardner, if the other 2 guys get bullied off the snap and you're playing 60% bump and run coverage, you're in a ton of trouble, right? So they need, with how he plays and the fact they are not a rotation heavy defense, it's not a combo or disguise based defense. They don't trap a whole bunch. It is pretty straight up. We are cat coverage. It's 5 guys. Who's got the best cats? Really hard to pull off in the NFL because you got to roll a practice squad in by week 3, right? The guy has to walk in from Canada and say, I'm playing slot corner this week. It's really, really hard to get away with that stuff in the NFL. That's why teams don't run it that much anymore, because it's just really difficult. So it's hard to just look at the rosters now and say, oh, that's a really clean fit for the style he would want to run. I guess there'd be more maneuverability with the Jets, right? Where you could go and get guys in free agency. You could take some flyers on some younger guys. You could maybe take a top end swing on a safety. So that probably would make more sense from that standpoint. But I really think with him and the way you mentioned the quote he had there, and when you read him speak and you go through the playbook, the aura to me is like total organizational control. That he's got a real vision for how he wants to do this thing. And I just don't know if he wants to be dealing with kind of the egoing and politicking of the son played Madden on a Sunday and then walks in and tells the coaching staff on Monday that, hey, I think we should go and trade for this left tackle. It's like, all right, buddy. Whereas in the Saints respect him so immensely. The only reason they're in this conversation at all for a guy that's respected is because they respect him so much. He respects them. Otherwise, who would walk into that situation? That is a complete dud of a situation, right? It should just be Mike McCarthy retread, semi-retirement package. Everyone shakes hands and go home. So the fact he's even in that conversation, I think, is because they recognize we need a complete cultural shift. And if Loomis isn't leaving, which he's not, it's going to have to come from the voice of the head coach. And okay, Glenn's been there before, but he is really distinctively his own guy. And I think he's got a clear blueprint that he's had for like 8 years. Someone give me a chance to do this. So I think for what he would actually want to put onto a franchise, the Saints make more sense to me. But if he just wants to go and win football games in 2-3 seasons and maybe make the playoffs, there's just a better chance with the roster situation with the Jets.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe the video. And if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, you can get one to see all the premium stats that we talked about here on the show, plus the expert betting and fantasy advice over at subscribe.pff.com. The description is also right below, so if you are not a PFF Plus subscriber, you can become one today.